second attempt at American Spirits, episode 38, wherein we begin our treatment of the southwest of these beautiful United States, the civilizational predecessors that we found here, and the interactions between the peoples there and our own peoples. It is a fascinating story that we will unwind at some length. And to help me do so, first off, as always, Mr. George Bagby. How are you doing this evening, sir?
I'm doing well. I'm happy to be with you. I've got a sure internet connection this time, so uh, happy to
Indeed.
try it again.
Those who were here last week will remember we had some connection issues, but those appear to have been banished. So hopefully we will proceed smoothly this time. And also joining us is a subject matter expert in the Southwest, none other than Mr. Thomas Wayne Riley of the American Southwest Podcast. How are you doing, Mr. Riley?
Very good. I'm glad to be here. Thank y'all.
And we are delighted to have you here. All right. Well, why don't we begin at the beginning? Mr. Bagby, you had some things to say about the civilizations pre-Columbia and post-Columbia, Columbus.
Indeed. So I thought it'd be helpful starting off with the Southwest as we are today to contrast civilization among pre-Columbian Americans. So at the time of European contact, we have large empires in Central and South America, the most famous being the Aztecs, the Mayans, and the Incans down in South America. It's really important to draw a contrast between what those civilizations were capable of and what they represented, and the North American natives, basically everyone north of Mexico. So the Aztecs are what the anthropologists would term a Bronze Age civilization, which is a reference to their technology. Everyone north of them, with the exception of, say, the Pueblo Indians in the Southwest, an important exception because that's in our area, they are not working with stone, like building things out of stone. They only have stone tools. Many of them, depending on their geography, aren't even working with stone tools. They have no written languages. The Aztecs, in contrast, do, though it is a very difficult language to work with. They have a kind of a primitive pictographic script in the Aztec Empire, but they can communicate information that way. Their numerology is far more complicated yet more efficient in communicating information. And so the Aztecs famously have a an astronomical record. They have complex calendars. They do mathematical calculations. The Aztecs build cities out of stone. The famous stone temples down in Central America being an example. The Aztecs also have things like fermentation technology. They're making mild alcoholic beverages like the modern Mexican drink pulque. That's something the Aztecs had. Um, Guacamole is even an Aztec dish. It's of pre-Columbian origins, um, and they have complex irrigation for their agriculture and such. Most Native Americans in North America, everything north of Mexico, has no such technology. The exception being the Pueblo Indians in the Rio Grande Valley and some other places that have irrigation systems, and they have permanent kind of agricultural technology.
An example of Aztec sophistication, I want to say that their counting system was base 20, was it not?
I can't give any information about that. Do you have anything on that, Riley?
I do not, actually. I don't know too much about the Aztecs. I did my archaeological dig in Belize because I was obsessed with the Maya
Hmm.
before switching to Southwestern archaeology when I graduated. That's that was I don't know anything about the 20 system. That'd be interesting to learn, though. But I do know there are a couple. They're finding some vessels with possible alcohol in them on the Mississippian frontier with the Mississippian culture, but it would have been very just fermented, not like obviously distilled, but
Hmm.
just fermented corn stuff. Southwest, no doubt, did, but only the elites. And chocolate too has even been found in Louisiana, maybe, and Florida, and as high up as I think Cahokia may have had chocolate from Central America
Wow.
as well.
Hmm.
Well, that's an important point. There are older civilizations in pre-Columbian America that were extinct at the time of European encounter. And you mentioned the Mississippian culture. These are the mound building civilizations who, in the archaeological record, they have permanent agriculture. They can live in one place for many generations. Most of the Native Americans did not have the ability to do that, with the exception, again, of the Pueblo Indians. The Pueblo Indians are a major exception for us, and we're going to be talking more about them. Much more sophisticated Native American civilization at the time of European colonization, and they're still evident in places like New Mexico, in particular. Places like Taos, New Mexico, which has this great big apartment building made of adobe that's been inhabited for, I want to say, over 1,000 years. Do we have a good date
Around.
on that?
They may have been there. So the Anasazi everyone knows about, they left in the late 1200s, 1280. They went down south to a place called Paquime, just across the border into Mexico. Uh, they were the leaders of the people before the Puebloans, the modern Puebloans, and I believe the Mesa Verdeans and the Anasazi were their central capital was Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, and the Mesa Verdeans up in southern Colorado. They were kind of at odds, and eventually they had a civil war, not like massive, killing, but they had a civil war. The Mesa Verdeans won, the Anasazi left, and the Mesa Verdeans took the technology. I should say the Anasazi went back down south where they came from, at least the elite, and the Mesa Verdeans took the technology and moved to the Rio Grande, where they already had kin, folk, and trading connections. And I think Taos is one of those that was there before the Mesa Verdeans and the Chacoans left. And so they may be, I would guess, around 1,000, but definitely around 1280 Taos. And I mean, all of the Rio Grande Pueblos in New Mexico took off because the entire Four Corner area was abandoned by the people that were living there, essentially. And the Athabascans moved in. They could have left also because the Athabascans moved in, but yeah.
And there are there's lots of speculation among the anthropologists. The anthropologists work with archaeology, obviously, that's their hard evidence, but then they have to theorize to explain the archaeology. And we have a lot of plausible theories that the mound builders of the Southeast and the Ohio Valley and the Gulf Coast and places like that were in connection with Central American higher civilization. One of the most
100%.
Yes.
Without a doubt, I think. It's actually could have been the Toltecs, it doesn't matter who it was, but there was a civilization in Central America after the Maya, before the Aztecs, that went from Tulum, Chichen Itza, to the Mexican Valley, to the American Southwest, and the Mississippians and the Gulf.
Now we have this theory, and we've got a lot of good evidence for it. Things like uh, chocolate presence in the mound building civilizations, the fermentation technology, which was completely lost by the successive nations that took the region after the mound builders, but also really compelling things like metal metal artifacts, which they themselves may not have made. I don't know if we can conclude that because of the presence of these metal artifacts that they had to get them by trade. It's possible they made them themselves. But these are like small pieces of jewelry that we find in the mound building civilizations. We also find things like bird feathers from Central America, and that's
Do
one of our
Macaws,
better. Go ahead.
the macaw bird. You
Yes.
could not hatch them. They tried hundreds or maybe thousands of times here in the Southwest. You had to, so a person had to have a little basket on their backs because there's pictures of it, not pictures, there's drawings of it. Had a little basket on their back with a little chicks in it. They had to feed them by mouth and carry them from where they're from, Veracruz or Tabasco. I don't remember where on the eastern coast of Mexico. They had to carry them all the way up to the Southwest
they
and
did this over land?
overland. Yep.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I was about to ask what kind of vessels they were using to conduct this trade, but that's amazing.
Is by foot. I mean, the people of the Americas were the best walkers and runners on the planet. We all developed agriculture out in Europe and the Asians as well, but the people, so I don't know how that affected their diet, but the people and beasts of burden, the Americans, well, not Americans, but the people who were here before us did not have beasts of burden. They did everything by foot. I mean, some of the best runners in the world are still the Tarahumara, and everyone walked. I used to think the continent and the continents in the Western Hemisphere were kind of isolated. I no longer believe that. I believe there were probably people that walked across the Darien Gap from Illinois because they just
Wow.
they walked and they traded, and there's southwestern turquoise all over the Western Hemisphere. I mean, these people got around, and they did have boats too, but they got around.
Now, this is a good opportunity to ask a theoretical question. It's a question that I'm particularly interested in, and I entertain this idea from time to time. We have the decline of the mound building civilization, and we also have the decline of the cliff dwelling civilizations like the Anasazi, and the decline of the Hohokam peoples in what is now Arizona, the builders of Casa Grande, which is a very interesting ruin in Arizona. It's Coolidge, Arizona, I think is where you find it.
Yeah, my
Um,
friend's parents live across the street from it. They can see it from their house.
wow.
Yeah, I've been there many
I
times, and
would
there were
love to see it
hundreds of
someday.
Casa Grandes around the Phoenix Basin.
So we have these people who are building monumental architecture like Casa Grande, Mesa Verde, Chaco Canyon, places like that, and they disappear. We have the mound building civilizations, the builders of Cahokia, the builders of the Serpent Mound in Ohio, the builders of a great many interesting like settlements around mounds, which were permanent places of dwelling, and they are displaced by people who are hunter gatherers. They're living at a lower level. They no longer have the trade routes spanning thousands of miles. They have no information about the mound building civilizations or the uh, the large uh, city structures that you see in the Southwest. They're confused by them. Does this represent a massive civilizational decline over a region?
I believe it was because I believe the Hohokam, the Puebloans, and the Mississippians all Hohokam not at first, but eventually they all shared an elite class that was from Central America.
Hmm.
After hundreds of years, possibly 600 years, this ruling class lost favor with the people they ruled. And it kind of happened at the same time as a not quite hemisphere wide drought, but a pretty severe drought. And it was a successive decades of a couple years of drought, and then a couple of years of like we're just getting by, and then more drought. And that hadn't happened since the Altai thermal some 6,000 years ago that dried up all the lakes in the far west. And so these people began to rule as they lost control with a more and more iron fist, which is why a, an unfortunate amount of skeletons in the Four Corners area that are Anasazi have been cannibalized. I think up to 8 or 12%, I forget the number,
Mm.
have been cannibalized not for sustenance, but for punishment as a way to say you have not paid your taxes, corn, or you have committed witchcraft by not following the state religion, whatever it was. They went to these pueblos, the Chaco and Central Authority, the Anasazi, sent thugs or warriors out to these pueblos. They killed them, ate them, shat them out in their kivas, their ceremonial centers, their living rooms almost, and then burned everything down. And so we have found those fossilized coprolites. And that similar thing happened in Cahokia. It was a massive fire in the 1280s, which is the same time the Anasazi had some trouble. In Cahokia, all of the elite buildings we now know were burned at once. So the elite were kicked out. Like, you guys are done. We're tired of your rule. And I think that happened once it happened in Cahokia, it spread down the Mississippi, down the various rivers to even as far south as northern Florida. There was a um, above the equator, there was a hemisphere wide rejection of the elite that had been there since around 800 after the Maya, after whatever Teotihuacan was, because we don't know who built that. But after Teotihuacan fell and then the Maya, this is before the Aztecs. Toltecs were in there, but people argue it isn't the Toltecs, but it doesn't matter who it was. There was a group of people in Central America who sent elite north to go colonize and mix with the local populace and make a new ruling structure. And after 600 years or so, 500, 400, whatever it was, the people that were native to the area decided they'd had enough. And they expelled them, killed them, burned them. A lot of burning, a lot of burning.
So what takes their place then? Is this when we see the dominance of the hunter-gatherer mode? It's after the burning of Cahokia, the abandonment of Mesa Verde, things of that nature.
So in the Southwest, a lot of the elite that were opposed to the Anasazi, like the Mesa Verdeans, they had the knowledge, so they continued to grow crops up until today. Still, they have, you. Uh, Thankfully, Albuquerque cannot grow in size beyond its borders because it's surrounded by pueblos and reservations. I guess they're not reservations; they're pueblos, and those people still have massive farms. And so they kept the knowledge and they kept some beliefs. I mean, they still did human sacrifice here in the Southwest. They just didn't eat them anymore, although that the Hopi did, but the Hopi are actually Anasazi that stayed. But the Puebloans are different than the Hopi. In Cahokia, they still built mounds up until the Europeans came, and they still grew. I mean, even the Mohicans, even in the Northeast, they grew southwestern corn in the
Mm.
Northeast. So I mean, they still had. So ultimately, they rejected everything about a centralized government. There's a great book I forgot the name of. Shoot, The History of Everything or something. I forget it, but it talks about this a little bit. And a lot of these people, because the French recorded this. That's how we know it. The early French fur trappers and stuff that came down from what we call Canada down, they recorded these elites that had learned French. They recorded their oral histories, and they're like, "Oh no, we had a great civil war years ago, and we reject all centralized authority. So we're not going back to that. We have adopted our culture to not have rulers like that. We still have chiefs and whatnot, but we are not doing the centralized state anymore, even if that means we give up agriculture on a massive scale, because that's all the state was doing was just agriculture and war fighting on a massive scale, because that was the only two things those civilizations gave the peoples. Everyone gives taxes, and in bad years, we redistribute some corn. although that didn't happen as much towards the end, which is why, again, they all rebelled.
There are definitely parallels here between ancient Sumeria and ancient Egypt, and they're all building step pyramids, which is very interesting. But we move on to the entry of the new elites. So famously, Cortez conquers the Aztecs from 1519 to 1521. He does this with only a few hundred men. One of the reasons is because he finds disaffected native elites who are willing to fight at his side. So those are uh, the long-term foes of the Aztecs. They're being preyed on by the Aztecs. They're being rounded up and enslaved and sacrificed by them in large numbers. And they're done with the Aztecs. And that's one of the reasons they fight alongside Cortez and they find a role in the new regime. This is uniquely different than the area that we are focusing on, the Southwest, because there is a large population there and there are major civilizational stakes there. And that's one of the reasons why Mexico has a different ethnic composition than does America. The native population element in North America today is extremely small. It is maybe 1%, if that much. It's higher, according to the demographers, it's likely higher than it's ever been in known history today. But we also have a lot of incentives to claim that heritage today. So it's been inflated. But this is an interesting contrast as well. Again, making an exception to the Hopis and other Pueblo dwellers in mostly New Mexico. In most of North America, the mode of life is hunter-gatherer. They are not living in one place for more than one growing season. They are planting in many areas in North America, but it's not a sustainable practice, so they have to keep moving along and farm new land. They are uh, gathering edible food, hunting for food, often suffering from famine. Um, and they have the tribal system of government. So they've rejected a central organization of government, which you still see in Central America at the time of European conquest, but they have adapted to a tribal mode of government where the chief authority is a tribal lord who is the head of a community or band of somewhere between 1 and 200 individuals. More recently, we've associated that number with Dunbar's number, in fact, which is kind of an interesting connection in modern social research to anthropology. It does correspond with the number of people that the chief could personally interact with. And this makes estimating the numbers in North America very difficult. At the time of European conquest, the anthropologists are widely various of just how many people there might have been in North America. But given that most of them are hunter gatherers, many of them, the majority of these tribes require a very large amount of wild land to forage and hunt off of. And according to some anthropologists, this may have amounted to something like 100 square miles per individual,
Mm.
which leads to
Thomas Jefferson
really
will be
radical.
jealous.
Yeah, this is a really extraordinary amount of empty land. So a conservative estimate for the population of North America at the time of European discovery is in the tens of thousands for the whole of the area north of Mexico. And that would include the Pueblos, which actually have much more advanced agriculture and irrigation. The Pueblo Indians, because of their environment, because there is very little arable land in New Mexico, they had to have a technology that enabled them to replant the same area year after year. There simply weren't any other areas to plant in. And they also needed irrigation technology and such, even to survive in that measure of space. And so they had a more advanced agricultural technology and a more sophisticated social structure. But with most of North America, that was not the case.
Yeah, the New Mexican Puebloans had the three sisters, which allowed each plant to thrive off each other. And that would be corn, squash, and beans.
Indeed, and that was a common sort of tactic even among the southeastern Indians. But
Which they
in
got from the Southwest.
yes, they got it from the Southwest. It was a survival, evidently. So we see the early uh, movement and exploration. People like Hernando de Soto and Cabeza de Vaca, who explores in Texas and northern Mexico. Um, we
Well, can I
see the
tell that
founding.
story real quick?
Yeah, I'd love to hear you do that.
So Cabeza de Vaca, he was part of a group of gentlemen who they left. Oh, they went to Florida and then they went to Cuba and then they got shipwrecked maybe on their way to Cuba. I forget now. And they landed near Galveston and they were hosed. I mean, they were starving. Their boat was wrecked. They tried to build new boats to sail back, but I mean, they all just got pushed back by the surf. So they were found by the Karankawa Indians, who Austin and his 300 had problems with. They were cannibalistic, actually. And the Karankawa Indians found Cabeza de Vaca and his slave, or not, maybe it wasn't his slave, but the black Moor, Stephen. Yeah. And a whole bunch of other Spaniards. And they nursed them back to health, but then they saw the Spaniards, do something, kill an animal. I don't know. They saw the Spaniards do something and they just wiped them out. And they enslaved Cabeza de Vaca and Esteban, not Stephen. Well, it is Stephen, but Esteban the Moor and a couple other gentlemen they enslaved. But Cabeza de Vaca and Esteban and these other guys kind of got traded from tribe to tribe, first as slaves and then as like like in whatever you call like an interesting, like an intriguing person, and then eventually they became healers and holy men who had this weird language and they could heal the sick by praying to Christ, or praying to Heavenly Father through Christ to heal the sick, and it was working. Although unfortunately he left a trail of disease, death behind him. He didn't know he was going to do, but he was marched from the Gulf Coast all the way almost to New Mexico, probably a little bit into, and he heard tale of these 7 cities of Cibola, these golden cities over there. It was just the Pueblos who were just caked in bright mud, but he heard of like these cities that were incredible after, I hate being a history podcast from forgetting, but it was like 5 or 7 years or something ridiculous. He gets back down all the way to Mexico City and he tells this story. And immediately this story picks up. And so Coronado hears the story and he's like, I'm ready to I'm ready to go find those 7 cities of Cibola. And he takes Esteban the Moor slave with him actually. But yeah.
Hmm.
So that becomes ground for the original Spanish exploration of the Southwest with Coronado. And Coronado is looking for the fabled cities of gold. He goes out as far as Kansas, searching, is frequently very belligerent and brutal along the way because he's a treasure seeker. But he maps out the Southwest, and we uh, we follow that with the 1610 founding of Santa Fe in New Mexico, which is a very important Spanish trading center. The Pueblo Indians in what is now New Mexico have industries, they have mines, there's silver and turquoise there. They are also weaving, uh, weaving blankets and other textiles. So there is a bountiful kind of trade there. And Santa Fe is established to make that connection with the outside world. Later on, Santa Fe becomes a very important node in a trade from Mexico up towards Independence, Missouri, which is the origin of the Santa Fe Trail from New Mexico all the way up to the banks of the Missouri River.
Mhm. And that would have been Oñate who conquered New Mexico in 1598 and then established Santa Fe afterwards. It was a heck of a fight. The Puebloans put up a fight. They always hit up in the top of their mesas and threw down stones, and it was hand to hand combat. It was rough, but obviously the Spanish prevailed with a lot of help from sympathetic Puebloans. And yeah, so the Santa Fe was an important trading route via Pecos. They were in contact with the Plains Indians who brought them bison pelts, and they would give them pottery or ceramics, and it was a very lucrative trade. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah.
No, indeed, and it's an important element there. At least I always identify it as important. The Spanish justify their conquest in part because the Puebloans they have resources, they have developed agricultural areas and such. It's a habitable area, and the Spanish are a mobilized warlike people. They have a soldier class, and this is very correspondent to the medieval system where the soldier class, they are there on pay. They are there to fight, and they are there to protect the serfs who are under the protection of their liege, whoever he might be. So when New Mexico is added to the Spanish Empire, there are these suzerains there, the governors of the region. They have their soldiers. The Spanish typically set up presidios, which is the fortification where the soldiers are garrisoned, and they are there to protect the serfs that are under their protection, in this case, the Pueblo Indians. Now, the Pueblos are being preyed on by other warlike nations in the area. So we
The
have
Apache.
the Apache and also further to the east, the Comanches.
Not quite
And
yet. We're jumping ahead a couple hundred years there, but the Comanches actually kick out the Apaches. But yeah, yeah. And I'm
yes,
sorry, Bagby. Can I say something real quick about all
yeah,
that?
go right ahead.
So the crown and the viceroy did not want to keep New Mexico, as they didn't want to garrison soldiers in the presidios. They didn't want to build churches. They didn't want to deal with any of that. The There were two things that kept the Spanish in New Mexico first, and then eventually southern Arizona. And it was the promise of some mystical gold and silver that didn't really ever pan out until we took over the Southwest. But and then there was the souls of the American Indians that the priests under Oñate converted. It was constantly, this is too expensive. It's too far away from me. It's actually was faster to get on a boat on the Pacific and sail to California and then walk to New Mexico than it was to walk from DF or Mexico City up to Santa Fe. And it was a very dangerous trek. By now, you have Apaches. And so the two things that kept the Southwest in the grasp of Spain was the promise of future riches, which never panned out. And we have to keep these children of gods, these infidels, these Indians, we have to keep them Christian. So we have to keep New Mexico because we have to continue to, because if we abandon them, we're just as at fault as they were before we converted them. And that was a major factor from 1600 on to the the Pueblo Revolt in 1680, which I'm sure you'll get to, but even the reconquest of New Mexico was to get the Indians back into the fold of Christ.
They have a responsibility then. So this develops into a major revolt in 1680, the Pueblo Revolt, which takes place in modern day New Mexico. And the
It was
Pueblo.
led by an Indian named Popeye, who may have been descended from Esteban, the Moor, the Black Moor.
Wow.
He may have
I
been
didn't know
descended
that connection.
from Zuni and the Black Moor. He could be a mythical figure for all we know, but Popeye led the 1680 Spanish Revolt. There have been a couple, or not Spanish, the Puebloan Revolt. There have been a couple revolts, but they'd all been put down because some tribal or not, a Puebloan leader told the Spanish, "Hey, this is going on. You should put it down because we want to stay Catholic, or we don't want trouble," essentially. And so Popeye led a successful rebellion in 1680, and he kicked out he killed a lot of Spanish, especially Spanish fathers, and as in Catholic fathers, and he kicked out the Spanish completely from New Mexico. And that isn't that I'm sure you're going to say it, so I'm stealing your thunder. The 1680 Pueblo Revolt is what allowed the rest of North American Indians to get the horse. And I'll give it back to you.
No, go ahead and develop that because I'm very interested in what you have to say.
So Popeye was some mythical possible figure who was harking back to the Anasazi Civil War. He said, "We Puebloans or Mesa Verdeans kicked out the old cannibal Chacoans. They're gone. And I am I'm not sure if he said this, but he hinted at it. I'm the resurrected leader of that revolt." And now it's 1680 instead of 1280. And he aligned the Pueblos, which a lot of them did not speak intelligible languages. A lot of them did, but they did not speak intelligible languages. So they probably communicated through interpreters or hand signals or whatnot. He used, I think, knotted cords, and he sent runners to every Pueblo, and he said, every day, take out one of the knots. And when the knots are done, that is the day where you're all going to unite and overthrow the Spanish from New Mexico, from the Rio Grande Valley. And they did successfully. It was horrible. A lot of brutal violence on the part of the Puebloans and other tribes around, mostly Puebloans. A lot of hate against the Catholic fathers. I'm not Catholic, but a lot of hate against the Catholic fathers, unwarranted. And the Spanish all fled down the Rio Grande Valley back to, I guess, what we call El Paso now, but was Franklin. And before that, I forget the Spanish name of El Paso at that time, but it was across the Rio Grande Valley. So Ciudad Juarez now, but obviously Juarez is much later. But yeah, so they totally kicked out the Spanish successfully. In my episode, I called it the first successful American Revolution because it was rough. The Spanish, they kind of sat around in El Paso for a while, and then they sent up a couple weak excursions to go take it back. It didn't really happen, but then, I'm sure you're going to talk about it in a little bit, successfully retook New Mexico. But that Pueblo Revolt ended up because when the Spanish left, the Spanish kept horses like we, unless you're a spy for a small Middle Eastern country, the Spanish kept horses like we keep nuclear secrets. Like they did not allow horses to ever be given or except for scouts, like ridden by Puebloans or American Indians. They kept them under lock and key. If one was missing, they went out and found it. I mean, at that time, the horse was equivalent to, Soviet American parity when we both got the bombs. We could not
Mm.
let the Indians get the horse. I say we as the
Absolutely.
Spanish. And so the 1680 revolt, all the Spanish fled with what they had on their backs, and so they left thousands of horses in corrals. And by the time, I mean, just 50 years later, the horse was spreading rapidly, especially north in the mountains and east to the plains.
That development was huge because this totally changes the culture of a number of Native American tribes. Previously, there were martial tribes that specialized in raiding their traditional foes or just whoever happened to be near them and pillaging them. But when the horse becomes available to them, tribes like the Apache and later the Comanches and other nations elsewhere, like the Sioux Indians or the Lakota, um, they organize their lives around the horses and they become like the barbarian Huns of America, very fearsome people living on horseback, riding hundreds of miles to do a daring raid or massacre and pillage before disappearing into the wilderness. And that's part of the origin of the lore of the several of these very fearsome nations in the Southwest, people like the Apache and the Comanches.
And the Apache were able to adopt the horse, maybe not as fast as the Comanche, but so fast that the Puebloans, who had fields of corn and cotton and whatever and beans and squash and whatnot, they lived in centralized locations, and the Apaches could get on these horses, ride the horses right up to the Pueblos, get off the horses, go in, massacre. I mean, Pecos Pueblo, one of the largest Pueblo, and I think the largest Catholic church north of the Rio Grande, largest church period for a long time, was burned in the 1680 revolution. But they rebuilt the Pecos Puebloans with the help of the Spanish, and they lived there for a little while until it was abandoned because of the Apache raids on horseback. The town I live in New Mexico, Tijeras, there is a pueblo here. It was abandoned in 1200. It was abandoned a long time ago. But the Mexicans, or I guess Spaniards, yeah, yeah, the Spaniards that eventually became Mexicans, they have land. They had a land grant here in Tijeras in the 1810s. So this was before the Mexican Revolution. So they would have been Spaniards. The Apache came in and stole every child, killed every man, and probably just left the women here, although some women they carried away with them. But the town I live in was raided by Apaches in the early 1800s, and everyone was carried off on horseback. And the people that lived here, they had horses, but you cannot fight against such a horseback marshaled people like the Apaches, as you were saying.
Yeah, it's a very fearsome thing, and there are lots of chilling tales that come out of those nations and their exploits. So now we come to the story of Father Eusebio Kino, a remarkable Jesuit priest who had a he had a academic career in Europe. I think he was Italian initially, um, but he went to a university, um, had a serious illness and a mystical experience in his illness, and swore that he would dedicate himself to the church and the order of Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, and his own life kind of parallels that of Ignatius Loyola, the the prominence in his early career, his promise, his resources and such. he could have been a very successful man in the secular world. But like Loyola, he dedicates himself to the work of the church and to missions. And so Kino leaves Central Europe, leaves the university and all the rest, and goes to northern Mexico. There he has a long career exploring the Southwest and establishing missions. So between 1687 and 1711, he goes through Baja California. He establishes Baja California is not an island, but actually a long peninsula. He goes to Sonora in northern Mexico. He goes into Arizona, into southern Arizona. He establishes 24 missions in this period. Many of them are just isolated chapels where an itinerant priest might serve the Mass to Native American converts in the area, but it doesn't amount to a permanently settled place. But he does bring with him things like bread making technology, things like wine plantings, because obviously these are important elements of Christian civilization. Christians cannot celebrate their religion without bread and wine. And so this was an aspect of mission culture that is very important in retrospect. Fermentation technology followed the work of these Christian missionaries. But Kino is a really extraordinary man. He is a geographer, he has a scientific training, so he is a map maker. He is a trailblazer. He establishes uh, trails into these very remote areas. And he ministers to the Pimas, the Apaches, the Yumas, and he was just um, beatified by Pope Francis. So he's on his way to being a Catholic saint, which seems to me he has good grounds for being declared so. Um, but he is a major figure in the early settlement of the Southwest outside of New Mexico. Um, we we also see just after the life of Kino, um, in 1716, the establishment of the famous Spanish mission at San Antonio in what is now Texas. This is the famous edifice of the Alamo, which we would know readily for other associations that we'll get to later in our series. Now, the tenure of the Jesuits, who are very prominent in this period, it ends in 1767 when the Jesuit order is banished by King Charles III of Spain. And I was hoping that you, Jerry, could shed some more light about this. How was it that the Jesuits get disestablished and all of their property gets turned over to the Franciscans, at least in this sphere? Can you enlighten
I
us about that?
I am unfortunately unable to. This is a particular blind spot of mine. I don't know too much about the banning of the Jesuit order in this period.
The Jesuits are kind of delisted, right? Aren't they
Hmm.
excommunicated?
No, they're not excommunicated, but this was essentially a secular fight between the Spanish crown and the papacy at this point, and so they weren't
Oh.
excommunicated by the church. It was much more, I think, an act of the Spanish government. But as I said, my knowledge of this is limited.
Well, it seems to me, and I'm probably conflating this with another period. It seems to me it must have been much earlier. No, I'm thinking of something totally different. The Jesuits, aren't they refounded at some point?
I
I
looked
don't
them up
know.
when I was doing my series, and there are Jesuits right now in somewhere in the world. Probably, I think they're in America. I mean, maybe everywhere,
Well,
but there are
Pope
Jesuits right
Francis
now.
was a
Oh yeah,
Jesuit.
oh yeah.
Okay.
Pope Francis was a Jesuit. The Jesuit order is still very much in evidence. Any school you come across with the name Loyola is a Jesuit school, of which there are many.
Oh, we have a friend that went there. That's right. Shares my name, I think.
Well, we'll have to touch on that in some other context. It's an interesting one, and I don't know the lore, but
I will look it up for next time.
the there are a lot of missions in the Southwest that were originally founded by the Jesuit order. In 1767, they're turned over to the Franciscans, which turns out to be very important. So now I wanted to touch on the work of the missions, like what the missions were and such. They're quite prominent in California. Of course, they span from Texas all the way to California, and we've touched on some of the development in these different regions. Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California all have different experiences of this period, and that's part of their origin as regions. They're different geographical areas. There is some cohesion in the geographical area. There's frontier between these regions. There are natural boundaries, but also cultural boundaries between them. And that's part of the beauty of studying the area, that there are distinctive characteristics between these really very huge states, but they have a different spirit and a different story from place to place. But in California, where these missions are most famous, the place names are still reflections of the early mission stage. So you look across the map of California and you see places like San Diego, the name of the original mission, San Francisco, the name of the original mission, uh, Santa Barbara, Santa Monica, Santa Ana, and so on. All of these represent the original missions in the area. So California presents a very interesting contrast because the environment there is so beneficial. It led to a particularly strange Native American experience, where these are particularly indolent hunter gatherers in California. They they're not sticking to any one place. They do very little cultivation. They are just gathering from the verdant climate in California. They're not even doing very much hunting, with the exception of the the native tribes on the seacoast, which do engage in fishing. Many of the native tribes in California are not actually doing very much hunting. Um, they are settled in particular spots. They are described as extremely unhealthy because they do not move around. So they live amidst a great deal of refuse, including a lot of human waste. This is extremely detrimental to them. They have lots of epidemics and such.
Hmm.
Um, but they're living at a particularly low level, based on what I've read about uh, Native American tribes in the region. This is very unusual. The Some of the first Spanish missionaries in the area, they witness beached whales being a especially important event for these tribes. They would go down to the coast where there would be a beached whale and they would gorge themselves on the rotting whale,
Hmm.
which was particularly disgusting to the European explorers and the missionaries. So the missionaries, they go in there, um, they uh, they have some violent encounters with these native groups. These native groups do have something in common with the natives in the southeast and New Mexico and places like that. there's more or less constant low-level warfare in between these people, and there is social status to be gained for an ambitious young man to kill an enemy in battle. This gains him prominence in his community, and so uh, there is incentive there to have belligerent encounters. Um, but the missionaries that go into the area, they build these mission compounds. Initially, they take in the sick, the exiled, which are basically the felons of the nearby peoples. They've been tossed out of their communities and left to fend for themselves, which is naturally a kind of death sentence. Um, they have a really extraordinary mission approach. They display the cross, they display the crucifix, they display icons and statues to the Native Americans. They invite them into their chapels and missions, and they feed them, clothe them, and house them. These are Franciscans at this stage. The California missions are Franciscan. The Franciscans are particularly devoted to the hungry, the naked, the ignorant, and so on. They are very famous for taking their vows of poverty along with other vows, chastity and such. These are monastics. Um, they dress in burlap. They are famous for their very rough uniform, and that is a sign of their scorn of worldly adornments, wealth, and the rest. So they go out into the wilderness, they start farming there, they start cultivating vineyards there. Again, they're taking cuttings from vines back in Europe, they're transplanting them in the the very promising climate of California, bringing viticulture there. um, they make wine, they make bread, they build these barracks alongside the missions, and they're displaying the holy signs of the Christian religion to the native peoples. They are singing the mass, and this is a very attractive establishment. In a couple of generations, most of the native peoples in California are living in proximity to these missions. They are working the fields. They are disciplined by the Franciscan friars. Um, they're being uh, they're being taught agriculture, and they're settling in these mission communities. Now, this is extremely important um, when we talk about the abolition of these communities after Mexican independence, which we'll cover in our next survey of the material. Um, but they are civilizing these people. They've Christianized them in a couple of generations. Now, modern day critics will say just how much of this is genuine. How can you say what these people actually believed? They were there for the food, they were there for the other benefits. um,
Yeah, but they say that about, yeah, in Arizona and New Mexico too. They say that
they
about
do.
everywhere.
It's a fundamental disrespect of the reality of the religious life.
Well, people
They
who
just don't.
write that are not religious themselves, so.
Absolutely. And they don't have any respect for people who are, and they
I'm
read that
reminded
into
of
prehistory.
Barbara Tuchman's quip in Through a Distant Mirror, where she remarks that religion was, of course, fundamental to the Middle Ages experience, but that is for some other chronicler to investigate than her.
Yeah.
She's revealing something about herself there, it seems.
Indeed.
But this is a really extraordinary success, and it has received um, overdue recognition in modern times by the Catholic Church in my humble opinion. I'm not Roman Catholic, but I'm a big fan of these people. I like what they accomplished. Um, the most famous of all of them is a, a very recent saint of the Catholic Church, Saint Junipero Serra, who goes to California in 1770. He's experiences incredible hardships and also violent attacks by the native groups after he arrives. So he witnesses attacks, he witnesses murders and such, and yet he is absolutely steadfast in his devotion to these people and their spiritual good. And he establishes 9 missions in California and dies in Father Kino in incredible poverty and privation. Um, and he was recently canonized. I don't remember the year he was canonized. He was canonized within the last 10 or 15 years, I believe. He's called the Apostle of California. And he, of course, was a Franciscan. He dressed in a very rough way, had a very simple diet, and yet he built temples and educated barbarians everywhere that he went, bringing them up to a higher level of civilization and knowledge of their creator. So he's a really remarkable fellow. Um, I had a most consequential interaction about Saint Junipero Serra. I was uh, in the process of being canceled, and I was talking to someone I thought would be an ally of mine, a Catholic, observant fellow, and I brought up Junipero Serra, and I said, "Well, you can have uh, a certain sympathy with feudalism and such because of Seurat." And he disavowed any sympathy whatsoever. And he said, "No, I actually have a problem with this guy because he was a feudal oppressor.
Ah,
And he was telling the Native Americans that they had to work in the field and physically disciplining them on occasion and such." I'm like, well, that was the criminal code. He didn't lock them. He wasn't locking them in a whitewashed room and telling them to think about what they've done. He wasn't he wasn't a maladaptive school marm. He was a man who he believed that there were physical consequences for transgressions, and that is not in the least unusual in his time. That's what everyone believed then.
yeah.
Bagby,
It's
did
only
you
in
come
modern times
across
people have become Quakers.
Mhm.
did you come
Yeah.
across the Dominguez Escalante expedition?
No, do tell us.
So they were supposed to leave. So it was 2 Franciscan monks, Fathers Dominguez and Escalante, and modern day Escalante in Utah is named after Escalante, and the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument is named after him. Although they never stepped foot in either of those places, but they came close. They were supposed to leave on July the 4th, 1776 from Santa Fe to go to San Francisco across the Sierra Nevadas. They didn't end up doing that because they left too late, because I think Escalante was too sick. So they left on July 29th, 1776 instead of July the 4th, 1776. And they no doubt had no idea what was going on thousands of miles to their east. But they left from Santa Fe and they did a trek longer than Lewis and Clark. They went north into Colorado, west into Utah, went to the Salt Lake Valley, went to the Salt Lake, actually didn't go to Salt Lake, the Salt Lake, the Great Salt Lake. They went to the lake right below it, Provo Lake, and they met all along the way. They met Utes, and they were afraid of Apaches, and they were afraid of the Athabascans the whole time. But they got to the edge of Western Utah and decided if we continue, we will die, which they absolutely would have. It would have been a Donner Party all over again. But then they went south to the Hopi Mesas, which just 70 years before, there were 4 Hopi Mesas. One of them, the most eastern mesa, was converted to Catholicism, and the other 3, it's literally like a hand. If you put a hand and you put your hand down with 4 fingers, they had 4 Hopi Mesas. The pinky finger was a Hopi Mesa. The furthest east one got converted to Catholicism. After the 1680 revolt, the other 3 pueblos got together and decided this Catholic pueblo was guilty of witchcraft. They killed every single person and ate a good 30 amount of them. But so they knew that story. So they went down to the Hopi Mesas to hopefully there were no Catholic churches there at the time because after the revolt and after everyone got eaten who was a Catholic, they decided we'll stop by, see if they'll give us some food. We're not going to stay and convert them. We're just going to leave. And they did, and they survived, and they made their way back to Santa Fe. It was longer, even though you look at a map, it don't look longer than the Lewis and Clark expedition. It was longer than the Lewis and Clark expedition, and it started the same year we became a nation.
The mention of the massacre of the Hopi Catholics there is another reminder of why there were Spanish garrisons, why there was a tax system and an administration and such, because you can't allow this kind of thing to happen. This is
Not
at
at all,
odds
not at all.
with civilization. People come into your religion, they are you have a duty to them in this situation, and that's why you have wars among the Spanish and these various hostile nations, because this kind of thing does happen regularly down there.
Exactly,
So
and
this
one
it's
of the
a
reasons why
common
the
criticism.
Spanish
It's a common criticism of the Spanish administration that these people are just money grubbing tax farmers and such. There's extremely little to be made from all of that. There wasn't wealth and prestige to be had in this region. There was always rumors that it was right around the corner, but it was never something that was realized. There was never a great gold mine that made everyone there rich in the
No, there was
administration.
not. Nope.
It
I mean,
it was
being called the New Mexican governor, called as New Mexican governor, it was a position that you could just you didn't want it or you knew you could use it to your advantage, but it wasn't some the Mexican Northwest was not some place people wanted to go.
Hmm.
but it was a place that people went nevertheless out of a sense of duty and um, other kinds of opportunities, like spiritual opportunities, which
Exactly.
is really the only way that we can account for the long list of uh, remarkable leaders and heroes that we see in this area. These missionaries like Father Kino and Saint Junipero Serra. Um, the only explanation that we can give for their careers is spiritual heroism,
Yeah, if I
blazing
could
trails into the wilderness.
engage in a little bit of metaphysical speculation, seems to me that the 800-year experience of the Reconquista shaped the Spanish soul to undertake exactly this work.
Certainly, great spiritual struggle and sacrifice in this distant and parched land.
Hmm.
So, just to leave us off here, and in conclusion, what we've seen is the establishment of Spanish uh, Spanish suzerainty and these mission structures across the Southwest. We have um, a significant number of Native Americans in New Mexico and in California. We have a complex network of missions where there is very low level sort of industry going on. We're talking about tens of thousands of people total, small number of monks, also comparable number of soldiers, always pretty small in the area, a few administrators, and mostly Native Americans. And most of them in California are on the mission establishments there. They are learning handicrafts, they are learning permanent agricultural practices. They're learning how to care for the domesticated livestock, cattle, horses, swine, things like that. And they are only one or two generations removed from a hunter gatherer lifestyle by the early 1800s.
Hmm.
So that's where we're leaving off with our survey of the Spanish Southwest. And in our next episode, we're going to talk about Mexican independence and the secularization of the church lands, which dramatically changes the situation in this region.
Indeed.
To give a hint, the church, which I forgot its name, was turned into eventually a barracks and a place where an armament, and it was called the Alamo.
Huh.
Yeah. Yes. It was called San Antonio, the mission of San Antonio.
Excellent. Well, I'm very excited for that. And I would also like to point out that we here at American Spirits enjoy the most attentive and perspicacious chat in the podcasting game. For, in the spirit of the poor Franciscan friars, our audience is astute enough to give us no super chat tonight. Well done, chat.
We
All right,
accept their faith.
Indeed, this is a work of the spirit, the American spirit, you could say. All
Well
right, Mr.
done.
Riley, have you any final thoughts or shillings to impart upon us?
I think everyone look forward to the next episode. This whole series is going to be great. Listen to my show, The American Southwest. It's easy, and join your local OGC if you ain't already.
Excellent. Mr. Bagby, what's new from Tall Man Books?
I've got several big titles that are right on the horizon, but I'm not ready to announce them yet. I will pitch one particular title that corresponds with our material tonight.
Can I interrupt you?
Oh,
Mexicans,
sure.
Mexicans, and Texans in the Mexican War. You
Yeah,
have that
I've
book. I
got
bought it from you.
I do, yes. Texas and the Mexican War by
Yeah.
Nathaniel Stevenson, the Chronicles of America series. What I was going to suggest was The Spanish Borderlands, a chronicle of old Florida and the Southwest by Herbert Bolton. You can find that at my website, tallmenbooks.com.
Excellent.
I wish
Thank
I'd
you very
read
much.
that years ago when I was doing my Spanish Southwest series.
It's a good, succinct account, and Father Aquino and Saint Uniparus are both in that volume, if you're
Awesome.
interested.
All right. Well, thank you both, gentlemen. Thank you, chat, and we look forward to next week when we proceed to Mexican independence on this show, American Spirit.